Some of the creepiest situations of the modern day involve unsolved mysteries, cold case murders, peculiar happenings and strange disappearances that the authorities simply cannot conclude. Some mysteries have gone unsolved for years upon years, with little hope that any conclusion will be reached anytime soon. But for others, it is thankfully a very different story. Today, we will be exploring 5 eerie mysteries that were in fact solved, from grisly murders to strange cases of amnesia. Hit the lights, sit back, and enjoy. With Black Friday around the corner, our favourite thing about this time of year is finding amazing deals that we wouldn't usually get. Well, with today's sponsor Raycon, it's already an amazing deal every day of the year. But for this Black Friday, you can grab their incredible earbuds for even less, as they're offering our viewers up to 30% off across their website. Raycons are my favourite way to watch YouTube videos. With a multi-point connectivity that lets you pair 2 devices at once, these are a must-have for any audio lover. Their everyday earbuds also come with active noise cancellation, and I can't tell you how good this is for when you're on a plane or a train. You slip into your own world, completely immersed by your music, video, audiobook or podcast, and their fast charging function, where 10 minutes of charge yields 90 minutes of battery, makes them a game changer for traveling. Not that you often need to worry about charging them, as they feature an amazing 32-hour battery life. Raycon's quality rivals some of the biggest names in premium audio, but starting at just half the price of the other guys. An incredible deal even before you factor in the up to 30% off deal for Black Friday. They're also stylish and come in a variety of vibrant colours, including some really unique ones I haven't seen in other earbuds before. Not to mention how comfortable they are to wear. Now's the time to give them a try. They even have a 30-day happiness guarantee, so you really can't lose. It's time to save big for Black Friday. Go to buyraycon.com/top5s today to get up to 30% off site-wide. And now for today's video. Hit those lights, sit back, and enjoy. The strange case of Benjamin Kyle. On August the 31st, 2004, a man was discovered, injured and traumatized, next to a skip behind the back of a Burger King restaurant in Richmond Hill, Georgia, USA. Bereft of any possessions or clothing, the staff member that discovered him noted several injuries present on his body. 3 wounds on his head that had been caused by blunt force trauma, severe sunburn, and a series of painful bites from numerous red ants. The ambulance service were called, and the mysterious man was taken to a hospital in Savannah, Georgia, where he could be examined by professionals. As the man was completely naked when discovered, he had no identification documents on his person when he was found, and remained unconscious for the duration of his time in hospital. From hospital, the injured man, now in a semi-conscious state, was admitted to the Memorial Health University Medical Center, where he was able to provide staff with his full name, Benjamin Kyle, the first of which he insisted was spelt with 2 A's rather than an A and an I. Despite the fact that his identity could not be traced, Benjamin insisted that he was telling the truth about his name. When it came to light that the man was clearly experiencing a severe case of dissociative amnesia as a result of the mysterious blunt force trauma his head had endured, the search was on to find out who he really was. Benjamin Kyle was released from hospital, where he spent the next few years effectively homeless, drifting between men's shelters and medical facilities, and completing gardening jobs for one of the nurses who had been looking after him. It was around the time that he became fully conscious that Benjamin came to a few realizations. He could remember with perfection how to drive a car. Upon looking at his appearance for the first time in a mirror, he realized that he was 20 years older than he believed. The search was soon on for Benjamin Kyle's missing identity. The first step was to attempt to identify him via his fingerprints. His prints were compared with those on file for criminals and government personnel, but nothing was retrieved. DNA tests were undertaken to search for his genetic genealogy, and online databases were contacted for any information they might have had on him. Facial recognition comparisons from the Department of Motor Vehicles and research of birth announcements across newspapers also proved to be unfruitful. It took over 10 years from the point he was found to his mystery finally coming to a close, a time period that saw him undertake a plethora of tests and interviews, even appearing on a Reddit AMA session, which, sadly, got him no further to unveiling the truth. The mystery was finally solved in September of 2015. A team of adoption researchers led by C.C. Moore were able to finally crack the case using shared DNA profiles online. Through the process of elimination, they managed to find several people that were potentially related to Benjamin Kyle via a potentially matching family tree. When living relatives took DNA tests, they confirmed that Benjamin's name was in fact William Powell, who was then able to meet up with his relatives and recover his identity properly. William Powell was born on August 29, 1948, in Lafayette, Indiana, where he was raised by his parents. He cut ties with his family in 1976, abandoning all of his possessions to move to Boulder, Colorado, with a co-worker later that year. But this is where the story effectively ends. After the 1980s, Powell had no recollection of anything that happened in his life, leaving nearly a 20-year gap of additional mystery left behind. Debugging behind the Iron Curtain. In the 1980s, a series of software engineers writing code for Soviet microcomputers came across a bizarre and rather eerie phenomenon. The SM-1800 microcomputer that they were working on was installed at a train station close to Sverdlovsk, a site in Russia that acted as an important shipping hub in the 80s. Its purpose was to redirect train carriages to their intended destinations. But soon, a bug was picked up that caused a series of disasters. Trains would be rerouted to the wrong destinations. Some may not have been rerouted at all, and in some instances, these bugs would cause trains to crash. Strangely, however, these bugs would only occur at night, and all automatic testing by the programmers indicated that the computers were working as intended. Programmers were quick to address the issue and were determined to get to the bottom of what was causing these bizarre crashes and failures in the system. After several tests, the team noted that these bugs would take place when a certain type of cargo was being transported on the trains. Livestock, specifically cattle, that were being moved from northern Ukraine to a slaughterhouse in Russia. This was alarming, as previously cattle had been supplied from farms in Kazakhstan rather than Ukraine. Something to do with the cargo, or trains carrying the cargo, must be to blame. But what could be causing the system to fail so consistently each evening? The answer, eerily, can be found in the infamous Chernobyl nuclear power plant disaster, which occurred in 1986. When the disaster took place, radiation was launched into the surrounding areas, making living close to the center of the blast impossible to even this day. In the 1980s, the level of radiation at Chernobyl were much higher, affecting the land, people, and animals of Ukraine, Belarus, and the surrounding locations. It was all beginning to add up. The software engineers tested their theory, using Geiger counters obtained from friends that worked in the military to measure the levels of radiation associated with the oncoming cargo. What they found was shocking. The cattle being transported from Ukraine were covered in enough radiation to affect the memory of the microcomputers as they passed by on the train. This very same meat was being distributed across the USSR to be consumed by the general public. Over time, the radiation levels would drop and the computers would resolve themselves. But it is still nonetheless very frightening to think that something so seemingly unconnected and deadly could have been causing these bugs to occur. The Death Valley Germans. The Death Valley Germans, as they were dubbed by journalists, were a family of 4 from Dresden, Germany, who mysteriously disappeared on their trip to California's Death Valley National Park, one of the hottest and driest places on Earth, having been known to reach temperatures in excess of 56 degrees Celsius or 134 degrees Fahrenheit. The tourists consisted of Egbert Rimkus, 34, Cornelia Mayer, 27, George Weber, 11, and Max Mayer, who was just 4 years old. The family arrived in America on 8th of July, 1996, and intended to spend several weeks exploring California, returning on the 27th of July. It wasn't until July 22nd that they arrived at Death Valley National Park, where they visited the tourist center and picked up some souvenirs, before heading out into the Badlands to camp for the night, visiting several scenic spots the day after. The family's disappearance wasn't even noticed until they failed to board their flight home on the 27th of July. Egbert Rimkus's ex-wife and mother to George Weber was the one that raised the alarm after she failed to hear from her son when he was due back in Germany. Authorities shortly began retracing the family's steps, and were alarmed when they encountered their abandoned minivan in Anvil Canyon, a very remote part of Death Valley National Park, and one that would be typically very hard to access. 3 of 4 tires were deflated, but the family appeared to have continued driving despite the damage. The wheels themselves were also torn up by the rocky ground after an additional 2-mile drive on flat tires. Over 200 search and rescue personnel scouted the region around the van, but no trace of the family could be found. On the 26th of October, the search was called off, and the family were deemed to have passed away. It wasn't until the 12th of November 2009 that the remains of the family, reduced to nothing more than skeletons from years of decomposition and weathering, were found by hikers over 5 miles southeast of where the minivan was discovered. Identification was found close by, along with a journal filled with German handwriting. It could only have been the missing tourists. Strangely, it was only the 2 adults that were found. The bones of the children were never recovered. It was theorized that they became lost when attempting to take a shortcut through Death Valley National Park, but underestimated the conditions and length of time it would take them to get back to civilization. When their van became too damaged to drive, they attempted to continue on foot, but heat stroke got the better of them, and they sadly passed away before help could be contacted. The Kidnapping of Natascha Kampusch. On the afternoon of the 2nd of March 1998, 10-year-old Natascha Kampusch failed to return home from Brioche Weg Primary School in Vienna, Austria. Her mother, Brigitte Cerny, and father, Ludwig Koch, were terrified at the thought something could have happened to their daughter and contacted the authorities. Initial investigations returned a particularly alarming witness statement from a 12-year-old girl who claimed to have seen Natascha snatched from the street by a man driving a white van. This led to a huge police search, where nearly 800 white vans across Vienna were extensively searched in the hopes of finding the missing girl. But nothing was dragged up. The witness's statement was entirely correct. Natascha Kampusch had been abducted from the street on her way to school by a man by the name of Wolfgang Priklopil. And as the police searched van after van, Natascha was being held in a custom-made basement room within Priklopil's house. Heartbreakingly, the police did actually question Priklopil as part of the investigation to track down the van Natascha was kidnapped in, who produced a fake alibi concerning his van being used to transport rubble from construction work on his home. Natascha would be held in Priklopil's basement for a staggering 8 years before her mystery would finally be solved. These 8 years were spent in a room no larger than 5 meters squared, sealed off underneath her captor's garage through a secret door behind a cupboard. Windowless, with soundproof concrete concealing all evidence of the crime, Natascha's home for the remainder of her youth was bleak, an existence that was made worse by Priklopil's repeated violent outbursts and continuous abuse. Natascha would frequently be beaten to the point of being unable to walk. She would be denied meals and would often be subject to sexual assault at the hands of Priklopil. As the years went on, Priklopil became slightly more lenient with letting Natascha leave the basement. She would complete housework for him and cook his meals, which would eventually result in her spending time in the garden and, on occasion, even outside the house entirely, on trips into town. This leniency would eventually lead to Natascha's escape, leading her agonizing 8 years of captivity to come to a thankful close. The mystery of Natascha's disappearance was solved on the 23rd of August 2006. While Natascha was cleaning Priklopil's van, the very same one she was kidnapped in 8 years ago, her captor's phone rang. He temporarily left Natascha alone to answer it, and it was then that she took her chance to escape. Leaving the vacuum cleaner on to disguise the noise of the fence, she darted out of Priklopil's property and began attempting to attract the attention of neighbours. Disturbingly, it took a full 5 minutes of running down the street, knocking on windows and doors and screaming for help before somebody helped her. Natascha was reunited with her parents at the age of 18 and has since become an author, telling the tale of her kidnapping. Wolfgang Priklopil, rather than face justice, threw himself in front of a speeding train, taking his own life. The Claremont serial killings. Between 1996 and 1997, 3 women between the ages of 18 and 27 disappeared after nights out in Claremont, a suburb of Perth, Australia. Since the circumstances were alarmingly similar with each disappearance, the police began the hunt for a potential serial killer, attempting to catch him before he could kill again. 2 of the women targeted by this mystery offender were indeed killed. The bodies of Jane Rimmer and Kira Glennon were discovered naked or partially clothed, abandoned in bushland in the outskirts of Perth. The first of the killer's 3 victims, Sarah Spears, was never found. To this day, it has not been confirmed if the killer involved in the crime took Sarah's life, or if she remains out there somewhere as a missing person. The case was quick to attract major publicity, and a huge police operation was soon underway. The police soon announced that they were hunting for a serial killer, and the Western Australian government put a $250,000 reward out to anybody who could identify the perpetrator. The police questioned taxi drivers, hotels, and people on the street regarding the murders, but nothing progressed. DNA and fingerprint testing was used heavily to catch the killer, but no match could be found. At one point, over 100 persons of interest were being interviewed by authorities, but not a single one proved fruitful. Then, for years following the murders, the case went quiet. Suspects came and went throughout the mid-2000s, but the killings could not be pinned reliably on any of them. That is, until Bradley Robert Edwards came under suspicion. Edwards was working as a technician for Telstra at the time, and it was the company vehicles he used to aid him in the murders that saw him brought to justice. Edwards would travel around town, attempting to lure women into these vehicles, offering them rides home, at which point he would conduct his grisly crimes. Edwards was charged with all 3 murders, and his trial lasted around 7 months, commencing in November 2019 and concluding with a guilty verdict for the murders of Jane Rimmer and Kira Glennon in June 2020. Due to the unknown whereabouts and lack of evidence surrounding the disappearance of Sarah Spears, Edwards could not be found guilty for her murder. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with a possibility for parole after serving 40 years. Considering that Edwards was in his 50s at the time he was sentenced, the judge told him there was a high likelihood that he would spend the remainder of his life behind bars. So, that was 5 creepy mysteries that were finally solved, some after many years of torment and uncertainty. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button, and we'll see you in the next video.